Welcome back to Tina Romance Library, where powerful alphas fall hard, and the women they underestimate change everything. Every story here is complete, immersive, and emotion-driven. No cliffhangers, no rushed endings, just full romances you can sink into. So if you love possessive alphas, strong heroines who don't beg, slow burn tension, emotional payoffs, and stories that actually finish, you're in the right place. I need you to join the pack right now by subscribing. Leave a like if you enjoy immersive romance, and settle in because once the story begins, we don't stop until the ending. Now, let's get into it. I watched him choose her. Not me. Never me. The great hall was alive, with celebration voices rising in joyous harmony, goblets clinking like church bells, the fire roaring in the stone hearth as if the whole world had reason to rejoice. But I stood at the edge of it all, frozen, my heart splintering into pieces so small I wasn't sure I'd ever find them all again. He stood at the center of the room, tall and devastating in his formal regalia, the crimson cloak of the Alpha King draped across his broad shoulders. His dark hair caught the firelight, and those storm-gray eyes that had once looked at me like I was his entire world now gazed at her with something I couldn't name. Duty, maybe. Resignation. But not love. Never love. And yet, he reached for her hand anyway. The crowd erupted. Cheers shook the ancient stones of the palace, and I felt every single one like a fist to my chest. My wolf whimpered inside me, a sound so broken it made my knees threaten to give out. I dug my nails into my palms, forcing myself to stay upright, to keep breathing, to not fall apart in front of hundreds of witnesses. But beneath my dress, hidden against my ribs where no one could see, the claiming mark he'd given me 3 months ago burned like a brand. It pulsed with heat and pain, reacting to his proximity, to his choice, to the betrayal that was currently unfolding in front of me like some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The bond between us twisted, sharp and vicious, a living thing that writhed in agony as he smiled at another woman, as he lifted her hand to his lips, as he sealed a future that didn't include me. My hand moved on instinct, pressing flat against my stomach. No one noticed. Why would they? They were all watching him, their king, their legend, the most powerful alpha in 5 generations, as he made the political alliance that would secure peace across the territories. They were watching history being made. They weren't watching me disappear, because that's what I was doing, wasn't it? Fading into the shadows, becoming invisible, erasing myself from a story I was never truly part of. I was just the girl he'd found in the woods 2 years ago. The orphaned wolf with no pack, no family, no title. The one he'd brought into his home out of kindness or pity, I was never quite sure which. The one he'd trained alongside, laughed with, held during the dark nights when the weight of the crown became too heavy. The one he'd kissed under the starlight and promised forever to. But forever, apparently, had an expiration date. And it arrived the moment the council demanded he marry someone worthy of standing beside a king. Someone with a bloodline, someone with power, someone who wasn't me. I could still feel the ghost of his touch on my skin, still hear the words he'd whispered against my neck that last night we'd spent together. "You're mine," he'd growled, his canines grazing my throat, his hands reverent and possessive all at once. "You'll always be mine." And then he'd marked me, sinking his teeth into the soft flesh where my shoulder met my neck, binding us together in a way that was supposed to be eternal. The claiming mark of an Alpha King wasn't something you walked away from. It was sacred, permanent, a declaration written in blood and magic and the ancient laws of our kind. But those same ancient laws also said a king must marry for the good of his people. And I was not good for his people. So, here I stood, marked and mated and completely invisible, watching the man who owned every piece of my soul pledge himself to someone else. The bond between us screamed in protest, a psychic wound that bled and wouldn't stop. My wolf clawed at my insides, desperate to run to him, to fight for him, to make him see me. But I couldn't move, because beneath my hand, beneath the flowing fabric of my dress, Beneath the surface of my skin, a secret grew, one I hadn't told him yet, one I'd discovered only 3 days ago, and had been carrying like a fragile, terrifying miracle ever since. His child, our child, growing inside me while he promised another woman forever. The room spun, my vision blurred. His scent cedar and smoke and wild mountain storms wrapped around me like it always did, calling to something primal in my blood. Even now, even as he shattered me, my body responded to him, drawn like gravity, like magnetism, like every cell in my being recognized its other half and refused to let go. But I had to let go. For him, for the kingdom, for the tiny life I was now responsible for protecting. So I did what I should have done the moment I realized I could never be what he needed me to be. I turned. I walked through the crowd invisible, forgettable, no one important enough to stop. I climbed the stairs to my small room in the servants' wing, packed a single bag, and I left. I vanished into the night like smoke, like a dream he'd forget by morning. That was the night I disappeared. And that was the night the Alpha King began to destroy his own kingdom to find me. I met him in the forest on a Tuesday, not in some grand hall surrounded by ceremony and witnesses, not at a formal gathering where destiny announced itself with trumpets and prophecy. Just me, half-starved and running from rogues who'd murdered my parents 3 days prior, stumbling through territory I didn't know belonged to the most powerful pack in the north. I'd collapsed near a creek, my wolf too exhausted to shift back, my ribs showing through matted fur. I remember the scent hitting me first, that cedar and storm smell that would later become my addiction, my comfort, my home. Then the sound of footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, like whoever approached had absolutely no fear of anything the woods might hold. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to hide, to survive. But I couldn't. I was done. Finished. I'd decided that creek bed was as good a place as any to let go. Then he'd crouched beside me, this massive male with shoulders that blocked out the sun and eyes like a winter sky. And he'd simply said, "You're safe now." 3 words. That's all it took. My wolf had recognized something in him immediately, something ancient and absolute that made her bare her throat in submission, even as every logical part of my brain warned me not to trust anyone ever again. He'd scooped me up like I weighed nothing, carried me back to his territory, and had the pack healers tend to my wounds without asking a single question about who I was or where I'd come from. I found out later he was the Alpha King, that the man who'd saved my life ruled over 12 territories and commanded the loyalty of thousands. That wolves traveled for weeks just to seek an audience with him, and most were turned away. But to me, in those early days, he was just Kale, the male who brought me food when I was too proud to ask for it, who sat with me during the nightmares and never once made me feel weak for having them, who taught me to fight again, to trust my wolf again, to believe that maybe the world hadn't completely ended when my parents died. He never touched me. Not at first. He was careful, respectful, keeping a precise distance that should have felt safe but instead made me ache in ways I didn't understand. I'd catch him watching me sometimes during training sessions, his gaze heavy and intense, like he was memorizing every detail, like he was fighting something. I learned later that he'd known from the first moment. His wolf had recognized the bond the second he'd caught my scent by that creek, but he'd waited, given me time to heal, to choose, to come to him on my own terms. It was 6 months before he kissed me. We'd been sparring, something we did often because apparently the Alpha King enjoyed having someone who wasn't afraid to actually hit him. I'd managed to sweep his legs, a move he'd taught me himself, and the look of pride on his face when I'd pinned him had made my heart do something dangerous in my chest. "There she is," he'd murmured, looking up at me with those storm-gray eyes that saw too much. My fierce little wolf. The possessiveness in his voice had sent heat pooling low in my belly. "I'm not yours. Aren't you?" And then he'd moved faster than should have been possible, flipping our positions until I was the one on my back in the training mat with 220 pounds of alpha male looming over me. His hand had cupped my face with a gentleness that contradicted his strength, his thumb brushing my lower lip. "Tell me to stop," he'd whispered. I couldn't. I didn't want to. When he finally kissed me, It was like something inside me clicked into place. Like every broken piece of my soul suddenly remembered how to fit together. My wolf had sung with recognition, with rightness, with a joy so fierce it had brought tears to my eyes. He'd pulled back just enough to look at me, his forehead resting against mine. "There you are," he'd breathed. "I've been waiting for you." After that, we were inseparable. He'd steal me away between council meetings, pulling me into shadowed alcoves and empty rooms just to kiss me breathless, before returning to his throne like nothing had happened. I'd wake up to find him in my bed, not in it. He was too honorable for that yet. But sitting beside me, watching me sleep with an expression so tender it made my chest hurt. "Do you ever actually sleep?" I'd asked him once, my voice rough with drowsiness. "Not when I could be looking at you instead." "That's creepy, Your Majesty." He'd laughed, the sound low and rich, and pressed a kiss to my temple. "Then I'll be creepy. I've been alone for 32 years, little wolf. Now that I've found you, I'm not wasting a single moment." The court had no idea. We kept it secret, our stolen moments, our whispered conversations in the dark. He said it was to protect me from the politics, from the wolves who would see me as a threat or an opportunity. But I think part of him just wanted something that was only ours, something the crown couldn't touch or taint or turn into strategy. He touched me like I was already his queen long before the world knew my name. Reverent, possessive. Like every brush of his fingers against my skin was a claim, a promise, a vow written in a language only our wolves understood. He'd trace the line of my spine, and I'd feel it in my soul. He'd press his lips to my pulse point, and my entire world would narrow to just him, just us, just the impossible miracle of finding home in another person. But he was still the king, and kings didn't get to choose love over duty. I'd see it sometimes, the weight of it, when he thought I wasn't looking. He'd be reviewing reports from the border territories, his jaw tight, his shoulders tense, and I'd watch the man I loved disappear beneath the crown. The council was getting louder, more insistent. They wanted him to marry, to produce heirs, to secure alliances through blood and politics. They had a list of suitable females, daughters of alphas, women with impeccable lineages and powerful connections, women who could stand beside a king without making the other packs question his judgment, women who weren't orphan nobodies he'd found dying by a creek. "Ignore them," he'd growl whenever I brought it up, pulling me into his arms and burying his face in my neck. "You're mine. That's all that matters." But it wasn't all that matters. We both knew it. I'd learned the politics of pack life, understood the delicate balance of power that kept the territories from descending into war. A king's choice of mate wasn't personal, it was strategic. It affected trade agreements, territorial boundaries, military alliances. One wrong move could cost lives, and I was definitely the wrong move. Still, he refused to even consider their candidates. He'd sit through the meetings where they presented options, his expression carved from ice, and then he'd come to me and kiss me until neither of us could think straight. "They can't make me choose someone else," he'd insisted, his voice rough with frustration. "The bond is sacred. Even the council can't break that." "They don't know about the bond," I'd reminded him quietly. His eyes had flashed gold, his wolf rising to the surface. "Then I'll tell them. KL. I'll tell them you're mine. I'll make it official. Fuck the politics, fuck their lists, fuck all of it. You're my mate, and that's final." God, I'd wanted to believe him. Wanted to let myself dream that love could be enough, that the bond between us could overcome centuries of tradition and expectation. But I'd seen the reports he tried to hide from me, heard the whispers from the servants. Unrest in the southern territories, border disputes escalating, packs questioning whether their king had lost focus, whether he was strong enough to lead if he couldn't even secure a proper alliance through marriage. People would die if he chose me, and I couldn't live with that. The night he marked me, the world had felt like it was holding its breath. We were in his private chambers, a privilege he'd finally granted himself after months of keeping proper distance, of respecting boundaries that we'd both been desperate to cross. There was a storm rolling in from the mountains, thunder rumbling in the distance, and he'd been standing at the window watching the lightning fracture the sky. I'd known something was different the moment I'd entered. The air felt charged, electric, like the atmosphere before a shift. His wolf was close to the surface. I could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the gold bleeding into his irises when he'd finally turned to look at me. "I can't do this anymore," he'd said, his voice rougher than I'd ever heard it. "I can't pretend you're not everything. I can't keep my wolf from claiming what's ours." My heart had stuttered. "Kale, my wolf knew the moment I found you by that creek. He'd moved toward me, predatory and purposeful. Before I even saw your human form, before I knew your name, he recognized you, and he's been clawing at me every single day since, demanding I make you ours permanently." I'd backed up until I'd hit the wall, not from fear but from the sheer intensity of him. The council? Fuck the council. He'd caged me in, his hands braced on either side of my head, his face inches from mine. "Do you want this? Do you want me? Because if you don't, tell me now, and I'll walk away. I'll find some way to live with it. But if you do," his voice had dropped to a growl, "if you want me even a fraction as much as I want you, then nothing else matters." "You know I do." The words had come out broken, desperate. "But I'm nobody, Kale. I have no pack, no family, no—" "You have me." His hand had cupped my face, tilting my head back so I had to meet his eyes. "You have me, and I'm a king, which means you have a kingdom. You have power and protection and a pack of thousands who will bow to you the moment I make you mine. They'll hate me. They'll love you. How could they not?" He'd smiled then, soft and devastating. "I don't choose you because I'm king. I'm king because fate gave me you. Do you understand? Everything I am, everything I've built, it was all leading to you. You're not some distraction from my duty. You're the reason I can bear it." I'd started crying then, overwhelmed by the certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that we could somehow make this work despite everything stacked against us. "I'm scared," I'd whispered. "I know." He'd kissed my tears away, gentle and patient. "But I've got you, always." When he'd finally kissed me properly, it had been different from all the times before, deeper, more claiming. His wolf had been right there with him, merging with the man until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I'd felt my own wolf rise to meet them both, surrendering in a way that should have terrified me but instead felt like coming home. He'd carried me to his bed, our bed. He'd corrected and undressed me with hands that shook slightly despite his supernatural strength. Every piece of clothing removed had been punctuated with kisses, with whispered promises, with a tenderness that made me ache. "You're so fucking beautiful," he'd murmured against my skin. "And you're mine. Say it. Yours." I could barely speak. "I'm yours." His canines had descended then, sharp and deadly, and I'd tilted my head to the side in offering. The ultimate act of trust, of submission, of acceptance. The claiming bite of an alpha king wasn't just a mark. It was a bond that would tie our souls together, let us feel each other's emotions, share each other's strength. It was permanent, irrevocable. It was everything. "This will hurt," he'd warned, his voice strained with the effort of holding back. "I don't care." When his teeth sank into the soft flesh where my neck met my shoulder, the pain had been bright and sharp and absolutely perfect. I'd felt the bond snap into place like a live wire, electricity arcing between us, our wolves recognizing and accepting and celebrating the connection. His emotions had flooded through me, love so fierce it stole my breath, possessiveness that bordered on feral, and a bone-deep satisfaction that finally, I was his in every way that mattered. I'd marked him too, my smaller canines finding the same spot on his neck, and the sound he'd made part growl, part groan, entirely primal, had sent shivers down my spine. Afterwards, we'd laid tangled together, his fingers tracing the fresh mark on my skin with something like wonder. "No going back now," he'd murmured. "You're stuck with me." I'd smiled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Promise?" "Promise." 3 months later, he'd announced his engagement to someone else, and I'd realized that some promises weren't meant to be kept. The great hall had been decorated for a celebration. Banners in the royal colors, deep crimson and gold, hung from the vaulted ceilings, and every surface gleamed with candlelight. The stone floors had been polished until they reflected the flames like water, and the long tables groaned under the weight of enough food to feed an army, which, essentially, was what had gathered. Alphas from every territory, their betas and enforcers, representatives from packs I'd never even heard of, all here to witness history, all here to watch my world end. I'd tucked myself into an alcove near the servants' entrance, half hidden behind a marble pillar that had probably stood in this hall for 1,000 years. Close enough to see everything, far enough that no one would notice me. Just another face in the crowd, another body taking up space. I wore a simple gray dress, nothing that would draw attention. I'd learned early that invisibility was a survival skill, and tonight I needed it more than ever. The bond hummed beneath my skin, aware of his proximity even though I couldn't see him yet. It had been like this for 3 months, this constant awareness of exactly where he was, what he was feeling. Except lately his emotions had been muted somehow, like he was pushing them down or blocking me out. I'd wake up in the middle of the night reaching for feelings that weren't there, calling out through the bond to a silence that felt wrong. He'd been avoiding me. Not obviously he was too skilled at politics for that. But our stolen moments had disappeared. The late-night visits had stopped. When we passed in the corridors, he'd look through me like I was made of glass, and the bond would twist with something that felt like pain but came from his side, not mine. I'd told myself it was stress. The council had been relentless, and the border disputes were escalating. He was dealing with threats of war, managing alliances that could crumble with one wrong word. Of course he was distracted. But then 3 days ago, I'd overheard servants talking about a ceremony, an announcement. And when I'd finally cornered one of them and demanded to know what was happening, she'd looked at me with something like pity and told me the king was making his choice. I'd felt the bottom drop out of my world right there in the corridor. The mark on my shoulder had burned hot enough that I'd had to grip the wall to stay upright, and through the bond I'd felt nothing. Just that same muted emptiness that had been haunting me for weeks. Now, standing in this alcove watching the crowd gather, I pressed my hand against the mark and tried to breathe through the panic clawing up my throat. He wouldn't. He couldn't. We were bonded. Marked. The claiming bite of an alpha king was sacred, unbreakable. You didn't just walk away from that. You didn't choose someone else when your mate, your true mate, was right there. The crowd suddenly quieted, a hush falling over the massive space like someone had stolen all the sound from the air. I felt him before I saw him, that pull in my chest that always told me when he was near. That instinctive awareness that made my wolf perk up and pay attention. Then he entered through the main doors, and my breath caught. He looked every inch the king tonight. The crimson cloak flowed behind him like spilled blood, and the crown, something he rarely wore, sat heavy on his dark hair. His face could have been carved from stone, beautiful and terrible, and completely unreadable. Those storm-gray eyes that had once looked at me with such tenderness now scanned the crowd with cool assessment, finding the important players, acknowledging the powerful, calculating his next move. This wasn't Kale. This was the Alpha King, and he was terrifying. I searched his face desperately for some sign of the man I knew, the one who laughed at my terrible jokes and grumbled about politics while stealing kisses in empty corridors. The one who'd held me through nightmares and promised me forever. But I couldn't find him. The council members filed in behind him, 12 ancient wolves who'd been advising kings for generations. And between them, draped in silk the color of midnight, was her, Leonna Ashford, daughter of the most powerful alpha in the Southern Territories. Beautiful in that classical, untouchable way that made me acutely aware of my own ordinariness. She had breeding and grace, and a bloodline that traced back to the original packs. Everything I wasn't. Everything he apparently needed. My wolf whimpered, a sound of pure distress that echoed through my chest. The bond pulled tight, trying to reach for him, trying to make him feel what I was feeling. But it was like throwing myself against a wall. Nothing got through. Kale took his position at the center of the dais, and the room fell into absolute silence. Every eye fixed on him, waiting. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, too fast, too loud. My hands were shaking, so I clenched them into fists and dug my nails into my palms until I felt the sting. "We gathered tonight to celebrate unity," Kale began, his voice carrying through the hall with that alpha command that made every wolf present feel it in their bones. "To forge bonds that will strengthen our territories and secure peace for generations to come." No, 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 no. The words were political, carefully chosen, but I heard what he wasn't saying. This wasn't about love. This was about strategy, about power, about sacrificing personal desires for the good of the many. This was him being the king instead of the man. This was him choosing duty over me. I wanted to scream, wanted to shift and howl and make him look at me, really look at me, and remember what we were to each other. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only stand there as my entire world collapsed into ash. "The council has wisely counseled me on the importance of strategic alliances," he continued, and I hated how empty his voice sounded, how carefully neutral. "And after much consideration, I have made my decision." Through the bond, I felt nothing. Just that horrible, muted emptiness that suggested he'd somehow locked me out completely. Was that even possible? Could you block your own mate from feeling what you felt? Apparently, if you were strong enough, if you were willing to hurt them that badly. Liana stepped forward, her movements graceful and practiced. She'd been trained for this her whole life. How to stand beside a king, how to smile for the crowds, how to be the perfect political bride. She placed her hand in his, and I watched his fingers close around hers. The bond screamed. Pain lanced through my chest, sharp and vicious, like someone had reached in and squeezed my heart with a fist. The mark on my shoulder blazed hot enough that I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. My wolf thrashed inside me, desperate and confused, unable to understand why our mate was touching another female, why the bond was fracturing under the weight of this betrayal. "I choose Liana Ashford as my queen and consort," Kale announced, his voice steady and sure and completely destroying me. "May this union bring prosperity to all our territories and strength to our kingdom." The crowd erupted. Cheers shook the walls, wolves howling their approval, the sound building and building until it was deafening. I watched through blurring vision as Liana smiled triumphant and satisfied and stepped closer to him. Watched as he lifted her hand to his lips in a gesture that should have been mine, that was mine, that he'd done to me 100 times in private. The bond twisted, writhing in agony, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart that was already broken, something deeper, something fundamental. The bond itself, that sacred connection that was supposed to be eternal, was fracturing under the strain of his choice. You couldn't maintain a true mate bond while pledging yourself to another. The magic didn't work that way. Either the bond held or it shattered, and right now I could feel it splintering like glass. My knees buckled, and I had to grab the pillar to stay upright. The pain was everywhere, my chest, my shoulder, my stomach, radiating out in waves that made me want to curl up and die. Through the bond, I still felt nothing from him. No regret, no pain, no acknowledgement that he was killing me. How was that possible? How could he not feel this? Unless he'd found a way to sever his side of the bond completely. Unless he'd asked one of the council's witches to block it, to numb him to my pain so he could do what needed to be done without the inconvenience of feeling me die. The thought made bile rise in my throat. Liana was speaking now, something gracious and political about honor and duty, but I couldn't hear the words over the roaring in my ears. She looked perfect standing beside him, looked right in a way I never would have. Her hand rested possessively on his arm, and she gazed up at him with practiced adoration that made me want to shift and rip her throat out. My wolf snarled in agreement, pushing against my control, begging to be released so we could fight for what was ours. But he wasn't ours anymore. He'd made his choice, and it wasn't me. I waited, some pathetic, desperate part of me still hoping for him to look for me in the crowd, to show some sign that this was killing him too, that maybe he'd been forced into this, threatened or manipulated or given no other option, that his empty eyes and muted emotions were armor, not truth. But his gaze never wavered from Liana, never searched the crowd for my face. He smiled at her, not the real smile I knew, but the political one he wore for the court, and announced the wedding would take place in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. 21 days until he stood before the moon goddess and vowed himself to another woman, until he made her his queen and erased any possibility of us being together, until the bond shattered completely and I became just another wolf he'd once known. The council members were congratulating him now, clasping his shoulder and praising his wisdom. Several alphas approached the dais, eager to curry favor with the soon-to-be expanded royal family. Liana's father looked like he'd won the greatest prize in existence, which I supposed he had. His daughter would be queen, his bloodline secured in the royal succession, his pack elevated above all others. And I was nothing. Nobody. Just a girl he'd found dying in the woods and fucked a few times before reality reminded him that kings didn't marry orphans. The thought was vicious and unfair, and I didn't care. I wanted to be angry. Needed it. Because anger was better than this crushing despair that threatened to swallow me whole. Through the bond, finally, I felt something flicker. Just for a moment. A flash of, what? Pain? Regret? It was there and gone so fast I might have imagined it. I stared at him across the crowded hall, willing him to look at me. Just once. Just give me something to hold on to. Some explanation. Some acknowledgement that what we'd had mattered even if it couldn't last. But he didn't look. He kept his attention fixed on Liana, on the alphas pressing forward to offer congratulations, on everything and everyone except the mate he was abandoning. The mark on my shoulder pulsed one more time, a final, desperate attempt to reach him through the bond, and then went eerily quiet. Not the warm, constant presence I'd grown used to. Just silent. Like the connection had finally given up trying to bridge the gap between us. I needed to leave. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, to get out before I did something stupid, like march up to that dais and demand he explain himself in front of everyone. Before I broke down and begged him not to do this. Before I showed the entire court just how pathetic and powerless I really was. I would not give them that satisfaction. I would not give her that satisfaction. If Kale could stand up there and pledge himself to another woman without so much as a glance in my direction, then I could walk out of this hall with my head high and my dignity intact. I could disappear into the night and let him have his perfect political marriage and his strategic alliance and his peace treaty written in wedding vows. I could survive this. I had to. My hand moved unconsciously to my stomach, pressing against the secret growing there. The secret I'd discovered 3 days ago, when the healer had confirmed what I'd suspected. The secret that made this betrayal 1,000 times worse, because now it wasn't just me he was abandoning. Our child would grow up knowing their father had chosen duty over love, over us. I pushed away from the pillar on legs that felt like water, and forced myself to move. One step, then another. The crowd was too focused on the dais to notice me slipping through the shadows toward the servants' entrance. No one tried to stop me. No one even looked. I'd perfected the art of being invisible long before I'd met Kale, and apparently I hadn't lost the skill. The corridor outside the great hall was blessedly empty, and I let myself lean against the cold stone wall for just a moment, trying to breathe through the pain that wanted to tear me apart. The bond had gone completely silent now. Not broken yet, but dying. I could feel it withering inside me, and part of me wanted to claw it out of my chest so I wouldn't have to feel it fade. But I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not here. Not where someone might find me and report back to him. And then he'd know. He'd know I'd been there. He'd know I'd watched him choose her. And somehow, that felt worse than any other humiliation. So I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, and walked toward my quarters with measured steps that gave away nothing. I had one bag already packed. I'd done it this morning, in some dark moment of clarity when I'd known, somehow, that today would be the day everything ended. Clothes, a few coins I'd saved, the small knife Kale had given me for protection back when he'd still cared whether I lived or died. I left behind everything he'd ever given me. The dresses, the jewelry, the books he'd thought I'd enjoy. All of it stayed in that small room in the servants' wing, evidence of a life I'd tried to build and failed. The only thing I took that he'd given me was the child growing in my belly and the dying bond wrapped around my heart. It would have to be enough. The palace had a dozen exits, and I knew them all from months of sneaking through corridors to meet him in secret. I chose the one that led to the eastern gardens, the path least guarded because it faced the forest, and what guard worried about threats coming from your own territory? The night air hit my face like a blessing, cool and clean and free of the suffocating weight of that hall. Above me, the moon hung heavy and full, and I wondered if the goddess was watching, if she felt any regret for binding me to a male who would break every promise he'd ever made. I didn't look back, didn't let myself hesitate or reconsider or hope for a last-minute miracle where he'd come running after me and tell me this was all a mistake. I just walked into the forest, let the shadows swallow me whole, and vanished. I made it 3 miles into the forest before my body gave out. Not from exhaustion, my wolf was strong enough to run for days if needed, but from the bond. The dying, fracturing, agonizing bond that felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest with every step I took away from him. I collapsed against an ancient oak, pressing my forehead to the rough bark, and finally let myself break. The sobs came hard and ugly, the kind that tore at your throat and stole your breath. My wolf howled inside me, a sound of pure grief that echoed through the empty forest. Everything hurt: my chest, my shoulder where his mark still burned, my soul that felt like it was being ripped in two. How could he do this? How could he stand there and choose her without even looking for me? Without feeling what this was doing to us? Unless he simply didn't care. The thought made me retch, and I barely managed to turn my head before I was sick against the roots of the tree. My body shook with the force of it, and when there was nothing left, I stayed there on my hands and knees, gasping for air that felt like glass in my lungs. I couldn't do this. Couldn't run, couldn't hide, couldn't survive without him. The bond wouldn't let me. It would keep pulling me back, keep trying to bridge the distance, until it either brought me home or killed me trying. Then my hand pressed against my stomach, and I felt it, just the faintest flutter, so small I might have imagined it. But my wolf perked up immediately, focusing all her attention on that tiny spark of life growing inside us. His child, our child. The baby didn't care about politics or duty, or the fact that their father had just pledged himself to another woman. They were innocent in all this, and they deserved a chance to live, to grow, to know they were wanted even if they weren't planned. I forced myself to breathe, in and out, slow and steady, focusing on that small life instead of the dying bond, on the future instead of the past I was leaving behind. I could do this. I had to. For them, the nearest pack territory was at least 50 miles south, and I couldn't risk going there. Word would spread too quickly. A lone female wolf traveling without protection would raise questions, and someone would eventually connect me back to Kale. The human towns were safer in that regard. Humans didn't care about pack politics or supernatural bonds. They wouldn't recognize me or report my presence to the king. I just had to make it through the night. My wolf pushed to the surface, and I let her take over. The shift was painful, everything was painful right now, but once I was on 4 legs instead of 2, it was easier to move, easier to focus on the physical act of running instead of the emotional devastation threatening to drown me. I ran through the darkness, following game trails and streams, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the palace, between myself and him. The forest was quiet except for the sound of my paws against earth and the occasional call of night birds. The moon tracked my progress overhead, silent and watchful. Every few miles, the bond would pulse with pain, trying to pull me back. My wolf would stumble, whining, confused why we were running away from our mate instead of toward him. I had to fight her, push her down, remind her that he'd made his choice and it wasn't us. It got a little easier each time. By dawn, I'd covered nearly 40 miles and crossed into neutral territory, the wild lands between packs where rogues and loners sometimes settled. Dangerous, but also free from the politics that had destroyed my life. I found a small cave hidden behind a waterfall and collapsed inside, shifting back to human form. My bag had survived the journey, strapped across my wolf's back, and I dug out the spare dress with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The bond had quieted to a dull ache, like a wound that had stopped bleeding but still throbbed with every heartbeat. I pressed my hand to the mark on my shoulder and felt nothing. No warmth, no recognition, just scar tissue where there used to be a connection. Maybe he'd finally completed the severance. Maybe one of the council's witches had finished what he'd started, cutting the bond cleanly so he could marry Liana without the inconvenience of a mate crying in the woods. The thought should have hurt more than it did, but I was numb now, hollowed out, running on survival instinct instead of emotion. I pulled out the small knife he'd given me and stared at it for a long moment. It would be so easy. One clean cut, and the bond would die completely. I wouldn't have to feel it withering inside me, wouldn't have to carry this constant reminder of what I'd lost. But then I thought about the baby too small to feel yet, but there nonetheless, and I put the knife away. I would survive this. For them. 3 months later, I was living in a human village called Millbrook. Population, 217. Industry, farming and sheep herding. Supernatural presence, none. Perfect. I'd stumbled into town half-starved and exhausted, the last of my coins spent on travel, and the local healer had taken one look at me and declared I was too thin and too pale, and clearly needed someone to mother me properly. Her name was Margaret, and she was 67 years old, with more energy than wolves half her age. She'd fed me soup, asked absolutely no questions about where I'd come from, and offered me a room above her shop in exchange for help with her patients. "You've got healing hands," she'd said, watching me wrap a farmer's sprained wrist with a competence I'd learned from the palace healers. Natural talent. Don't see that often in one so young. I'd accepted because I had nowhere else to go, and because the work kept me busy enough that I didn't have time to think about storm-gray eyes and broken promises. I told everyone my name was Alara. Simple, forgettable. Nothing that would connect me back to the palace or the Alpha King or the life I'd left behind. I was just a young woman who'd traveled from up north, looking for a fresh start after losing my family. The villagers had accepted the story without question, as humans tended to do. They didn't notice the way I always wore high-neck dresses to hide the fading mark on my shoulder. Didn't realize I was stronger than any human woman should be, or that my senses were sharper, or that sometimes late at night I'd step outside and stare at the moon with an expression that probably looked like longing. The bond was almost dead now. I could barely feel it anymore, just a ghost of what it used to be. A phantom limb I'd learned to ignore. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd press my hand to my shoulder and try to reach through it. Try to feel if he was happy, if he regretted his choice, if he ever thought about me. But there was nothing, just silence. He'd married Liana 2 weeks after I'd left. I'd heard about it from traveling merchants who'd passed through the capital and couldn't stop talking about the spectacle. 3 days of celebration, they'd said. The most beautiful wedding anyone had ever seen. The new queen was elegant and gracious, and the king had looked every inch the powerful alpha he was supposed to be. I'd smiled and nodded and asked appropriate questions, and then I'd gone upstairs and cried until there was nothing left. But that was weeks ago, and I'd learned since then that crying didn't change anything. So I stopped. I worked instead. Helped Margaret with her patients, learned about human healing methods that didn't involve supernatural abilities, delivered babies and set bones and mixed herbs for common ailments. The work was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. These people needed me, and they didn't care that I had no title or bloodline or political value. They just cared that I could help. The children in the village had adopted me almost immediately. I'd been mixing a salve for Mrs. Peterson's arthritis when a group of them had burst into the shop, demanding I come see the enormous frog they'd found by the creek. The frog had been maybe 3 inches long. "That's definitely the biggest frog I've ever seen," I'd said with complete seriousness, crouching down to examine their prize. "See, Thomas?" a little girl with braids had declared triumphantly. "I told you it was huge. We should give him a name. another child had suggested. Sir Hopsalot, I'd offered, and they'd erupted into giggles. After that, I couldn't walk through town without at least 3 children appearing to show me some new discovery, or ask me to settle an argument, or convince me to play whatever game they'd invented that day. It was exhausting and wonderful and exactly the distraction I needed. Margaret had watched with knowing eyes as I'd returned from one such adventure covered in mud and grass stains. "You're good with them," she'd observed. "They're easier than adults," I'd replied, trying to brush dried mud off my skirt. "More honest. You'll make a wonderful mother someday." I'd frozen at that, my hand instinctively moving to my stomach. I was showing now just barely, but enough that I'd had to let out my dresses. Margaret had noticed weeks ago but hadn't said anything, waiting for me to bring it up in my own time. "The father?" she'd asked gently. "Gone." The word had come out flat. "He doesn't know, and he doesn't need to." She'd studied me for a long moment, and I'd braced for judgment or pity or unsolicited advice, but she'd just nodded and said, "Then we'll manage without him." Way. That one word had almost broken me all over again. Now, lying in my small room above the shop, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the village settle into sleep. My hand rested on my stomach, where the baby was becoming more active each day. Strong kicks that reminded me they were real, that this wasn't just a dream or a nightmare I'd eventually wake up from. "Your father is a king," I whispered to the darkness, to the child who couldn't hear me yet but someday would ask questions I didn't know how to answer. "He's powerful and strong and probably the most beautiful man I've ever seen." A kick, like they were listening. "He's also a coward who chose politics over love. But you're going to be better than that. Braver. You're going to grow up knowing you're wanted, that you matter, that you don't need a crown or a title to be important." Another kick, stronger this time. I closed my eyes and let myself remember, just for a moment, the way he'd looked at me in the moonlight, the sound of his laugh, the feeling of being held by someone who made you feel safe and cherished, and absolutely essential to their existence. Then I pushed the memories away and focused on the future instead. "We're going to be okay," I promised. "I'm going to make sure you're okay." The bond pulsed once so faint I almost missed it. A ghost of what it used to be, a reminder that somewhere out there he was still alive, still breathing, still existing in a world that no longer included me. I wondered if he ever felt it, this dying connection between us. If he ever pressed his hand to his own mark and tried to reach through the silence. If his new queen had noticed the scar on his shoulder and asked questions he couldn't answer. Probably not. He'd made his choice, and I had to believe he was happy with it. Had to believe that Liana gave him whatever I couldn't: peace, stability, a future without complications. I had to believe it, because the alternative that he regretted it, that he missed me, that he was suffering too, would destroy whatever fragile strength I'd managed to build. So I lay there in the darkness, one hand on my stomach and one on my heart, and I tried to convince myself that forgetting him was possible, that someday the bond would die completely, that someday I wouldn't wake up reaching for someone who was never going to be there. Outside my window, the moon hung heavy and full, and I swore I could hear wolves howling in the distance, calling to something, searching for something, or someone. I rolled over and buried my face in my pillow, blocking out the sound, blocking out the hope that tried to take root despite everything. He wasn't coming. He'd made his choice, and I had to live with mine. The baby kicked again, and I focused on that instead, on the tiny life that depended on me to be strong enough for both of us, on the future I was going to build from the ashes of everything I'd lost. "We're going to be okay," I whispered again, making it a promise instead of a hope. And somewhere deep in the dying bond, something flickered. Just once, then went dark. The traders arrived on a Tuesday, 6 months after I'd disappeared. I was in Margaret's shop grinding herbs for a tincture when I heard the commotion outside: horses, wagons, the general chaos that accompanied merchants traveling the circuit between villages. Millbrook was small enough that visitors were an event, and I watched through the window as half the town gathered to see what goods they'd brought. I should have stayed inside, Should have kept my head down and maintained the invisibility I'd worked so hard to cultivate. But I needed fabric. My dresses were getting impossible to wear as my belly grew, and I couldn't keep letting them out forever. So I'd stepped outside, one hand unconsciously resting on the swell of my stomach, and joined the small crowd browsing the merchants' wares. That's when I heard it. Absolute madness in the capital. My hand froze on a bolt of soft blue cotton. The Alpha King's lost his mind, another trader was saying, his voice carrying across the square. Tearing apart his own territory looking for something, or someone. I heard he killed 3 of his own council members, a woman whispered, her eyes wide with the thrill of gossip. Just ripped them apart in the throne room when they tried to reason with him. That's not the half of it, the first trader continued, clearly enjoying his audience. They say he sent his wolves to search every village, every settlement, every pack territory within 500 miles, looking for a girl. My heart stopped. What girl? Someone asked. The trader shrugged. No one knows. He won't say. Just keeps demanding they find her. Bring her back. Some say she was a servant who stole from him. Others claim she was his mistress before he married the queen. Poor queen, the woman sked. Married to a male who's clearly obsessed with another female. Poor kingdom, the trader corrected. The southern territories are threatening to withdraw their alliance. Border disputes are escalating because he's not paying attention to actual threats. Too busy searching for this mystery girl. They say he hasn't slept in weeks. That his eyes are more wolf than man now. That he's becoming feral. I backed away slowly, my chest tight with something that felt dangerously like hope mixed with terror. This couldn't be about me. It couldn't. He'd made his choice. He'd married his perfect political bride, and severed our bond and moved on with his life. Hadn't he? Probably just rumors. Margaret's voice came from beside me, making me jump. She'd appeared without me noticing, her shrewd eyes taking in my pale face and shaking hands. You know how stories grow in the telling. Probably, I managed, though my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Though if there were any truth to it, she continued casually, examining a spool of thread, one might wonder what kind of girl could drive an Alpha King to madness. I looked at her sharply, but her expression remained innocently neutral. Someone he loved very much, I'd imagine, she said softly. Someone he thought he'd lost forever. Margaret. Just speculation, of course. She patted my arm. Come, let's get you that fabric before these merchants pack up and leave. You'll need at least 3 new dresses before the baby comes. I let her lead me away, but my mind was spinning. The traders kept talking behind us, their voices carrying snatches of information that made my wolf pace restlessly inside me. Destroyed half the eastern forest. Hasn't touched the queen since the wedding. Swear his own beta is afraid of him now. Calling it the madness of the Alpha King. No, I couldn't let myself believe this. Couldn't let hope take root because hope was dangerous. Hope would make me weak, would make me wonder if maybe, just maybe, he'd realized what he'd lost, what he'd thrown away. But if he'd truly wanted me, he could have found me. He was the Alpha King, with resources and power beyond imagination. If he'd actually been searching for 6 months, he would have tracked me down weeks ago, unless I'd hidden myself too well. Unless being in a human village with no supernatural presence had made me invisible even to his wolves. The thought made my hands shake as I paid for the fabric. Over the next few weeks, more traders came through, and they all had stories. The Alpha King had destroyed his throne room in a rage. He'd banished half his council. He'd stopped holding court entirely, leaving the kingdom's business to his beta, while he obsessively pursued some phantom that only he seemed to believe existed. They say he can feel her, one merchant claimed, through some kind of bond, that it's driving him mad because he knows she's alive but can't find her. The bond. I pressed my hand to my shoulder, where the mark had faded to almost nothing. I'd thought it was dead, that he'd severed it completely. But what if I'd been wrong? What if his side of the bond was still active, still reaching for me, still trying to bridge a distance I'd made impossible? What if he was suffering too? Stop it, I told myself firmly, alone in my room that night. He made his choice. This doesn't change anything. But the baby kicked hard, like they disagreed, and I felt that ghost of the bond pulse for the first time in months. Faint, barely there, but unmistakable. He was looking for me, and part of me, the part I'd tried so hard to kill, wanted to be found. Scene 8. Wolves find me. I first noticed them 3 days later. Shadows moving through the forest at the edge of town. Too large to be natural wolves, too coordinated to be rogues. They watched from the tree line, never approaching, never making themselves obvious to the humans who went about their daily business completely unaware. But I saw them, and worse, I felt them. The bond, which had been quiet for so long, suddenly roared to life with an intensity that made me gasp and grab the doorframe for support. It wasn't dead, hadn't been dead, just dormant, waiting, and now something had woken it up with a vengeance. "Ilara?" Margaret called from inside the shop. "You all right, dear?" "Fine," I lied, my voice strained. "Just dizzy. The baby." She appeared beside me immediately, concerned, guiding me to a chair. But my attention was fixed on the forest, on the massive gray wolf I could see watching from behind an oak tree. His wolf. No, not him. One of his. I could feel the difference. This wasn't Kale, wasn't my mate, but it was close. Someone from his inner circle. His beta, maybe. Or one of his elite guards. Someone powerful enough to track a scent across hundreds of miles. Someone who'd finally found me. The bond twisted, pulling toward the forest, and I had to grit my teeth against the physical need to run to them, to identify myself, to end this hiding and go back to where I apparently still belonged. But I couldn't. Not when he'd chosen another. Not when he'd stood in front of his entire kingdom and pledged himself to Liana. Not when going back would mean becoming exactly what the traitors said, his mistress, his shameful secret, the girl he'd thrown away for politics but apparently couldn't forget. I wouldn't do that to myself, wouldn't do it to our child. "Inside," I said abruptly, standing too fast and making my vision swim. "I need to go inside." Margaret helped me upstairs, settled me in bed despite my protests that I was fine. "You're pale as death," she said firmly, "and your hands are shaking. Stay here. I'll bring you tea." The moment she left, I moved to the window. 3 wolves now. All massive, all watching the building with an intensity that made my skin prickle. They knew I was here. Somehow, they'd tracked me to this specific location, and now they were waiting. For what? Permission? Orders? For me to give myself away? The bond flared again, stronger this time, and I felt it. Him, not here physically, but connected somehow through his wolves, through the link that apparently refused to die no matter how much I willed it to. And for the first time in 6 months, I felt his emotions bleeding through. Desperation, raw, overwhelming desperation that made my knees weak. Rage directed inward at himself, vicious and self-destructive. And underneath it all, grief, the kind that hollowed you out and left nothing but echoes. He was suffering. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I had to grip the windowsill to stay upright. All this time I'd convinced myself he was fine, that he'd moved on, that marrying Liana had been easy for him. But this was the emotional landscape of a male being torn apart from the inside. This was what the traitors had been talking about. The madness, the rage, the obsessive searching. This was him feeling the bond die, and losing his mind because of it. My hand moved to my stomach, where the baby was going absolutely wild. They'd been active before, but this was different, stronger, like they could sense their father's proximity and were reacting to it, reaching for him through me. "No," I whispered. We can't go to him." Another kick, hard enough to make me wince. The wolves outside shifted position, moving closer to the building, still not approaching directly, but tightening their perimeter. They weren't here to drag me back if they'd wanted that. They would have done it already. They were here to watch, to confirm, to report back that they'd found me. And then what? Would he come himself? Would he send a formal summons? Would he demand I return to the palace to explain why I'd run, why I'd hidden, why I'd made him search for 6 months while his kingdom fell apart. The bond pulsed with that desperate, reaching feeling, and I felt the exact moment his wolves sent their report through whatever psychic link connected them to their king. Found her. The response that came back through the bond was so powerful, it drove me to my knees. Mine. Bring her home. Now. But the wolves didn't move, didn't approach the building or try to extract me. They just continued watching, waiting, and I realized with a start that they were being careful. That Kale, despite his madness, despite his desperation, had given them orders not to scare me, not to force me. He wanted me to choose to come back. Fat chance. I stayed away from the windows for the rest of the day, but I could feel them out there, could feel his presence pressing against the bond, trying to reach me, trying to understand why I'd run and hidden and cut myself off from everything we'd been to each other. Margaret brought me food I couldn't eat and tea I couldn't drink. Her eyes full of questions she was too kind to ask. "There are wolves in the forest," she said finally, settling into the chair beside my bed. "Big ones. Not natural." I said nothing. "They're not hunting," she continued. "Just watching. Waiting for something. Or someone," I whispered. She nodded slowly. "The father?" My hand pressed against my stomach, where the baby was still moving restlessly. "It's complicated. Love usually is." She reached over and covered my hand with hers. "But running from it doesn't make it less complicated. Just makes you more tired." "He chose someone else," I said, the words coming out broken. "He married her, made her his queen. I'm not running from love, I'm running from being second choice. And yet he's here." She gestured toward the window, toward the wolves keeping vigil outside. "Tearing his kingdom apart to find you. That doesn't sound like someone who's happy with his choice. It doesn't matter." But even as I said it, I felt the lie in my bones. It mattered. Everything about this mattered. The bond burned against my shoulder, the mark I'd thought was dead suddenly alive and demanding attention. Through it, I felt him closer now, moving fast, probably already on his way. The wolves outside weren't just scouts. They were a vanguard, holding position until their king arrived to claim what was his. Terror and anticipation warred in my chest. I wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready to see him, to hear whatever excuses or explanations he'd prepared. Wasn't ready to look into those storm-gray eyes and remember everything I'd lost. But the baby kicked again, insistent, and I knew I was out of time. He was coming, and I had to decide right now whether I was going to run again or finally face the male who'd destroyed me. The bond pulsed with his approach, and I felt the exact moment he entered the village. Felt his rage at finding me here, hidden among humans, carrying his child in secret. Felt his relief that I was alive, that he'd finally found me. Felt his desperate, overwhelming need to see me, touch me, claim me all over again. And underneath it all felt his fear that I'd refuse him, that I'd look at him and see only the betrayal, only the choice he'd made, only the male who'd stood in that great hall and picked duty over love. My wolf stirred, pushing against my control, wanting out, wanting him. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through the panic rising in my throat. "He's here," I whispered. Margaret stood and moved to the window. A moment later, she let out a low whistle. "That's him? The Alpha King?" I didn't need to look to know what she was seeing. Kale in all his terrible glory, probably still wearing his travel clothes, his eyes more gold than gray, his entire body vibrating with barely contained violence. Margaret paused. "He's quite something. He's quite married," I said bitterly. "And quite desperate," she countered. "Look at him, Alara. Really look." Against my better judgment, I moved to the window, and immediately wished I hadn't, because she was right. He looked absolutely wrecked. His dark hair was longer than he usually kept it, wild and uncombed. His face was drawn, harder, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant stress. But it was his eyes that destroyed me. Those storm-gray eyes that I'd loved were now predominantly gold, his wolf too close to the surface, barely leashed. He looked feral. He looked like everything the traders had said. He looked like a male who'd been dying slowly, and had just found his only chance at survival. Our eyes met through the window, and the bond exploded. He didn't move, just stood there in the middle of the village square, surrounded by his wolves, staring up at my window like he could will me to come down through sheer force of need. The bond thrashed between us, alive and screaming after months of silence, and I felt every emotion he couldn't contain. Longing, rage, relief so profound it made my knees weak. And love, so much love it felt like drowning. "Alara," Margaret's voice pulled me back. "There's someone at the door." I tore my eyes away from Kale to find her watching me with gentle understanding. "I'll send them away if you want." "No." The word came out stronger than I felt. "No, it's fine." It wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. But I couldn't hide forever, and whoever was downstairs wasn't leaving until they'd delivered whatever message they'd come to give. I made my way down the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing for support, the other pressed protectively over my stomach. The baby had gone still, like they were waiting too, holding their breath for whatever came next. The man standing in Margaret's shop was massive, easily as tall as KL, with shoulders that barely fit through the doorway. His hair was dark blonde, his eyes a sharp amber that marked him as a dominant wolf. He wore traveling clothes that couldn't quite hide the warrior underneath, and when he saw me, his entire expression shifted to something like relief. "Thank the goddess," he breathed. "You're really here." I recognized him then. Damon, Kael's beta and oldest friend. I'd seen him around the palace, always at Kael's side during official functions, but we'd never spoken directly. He'd been one of the few who'd looked at me with something other than disdain when I'd first arrived. "I'm here," I said carefully, staying on the bottom step, keeping distance between us. "Though I'm not sure why that concerns you. It concerns all of us." He moved closer, then seemed to think better of it and stopped. "May I speak with you, privately? Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Margaret." He glanced at the older woman, who'd positioned herself protectively near me, then nodded. "Very well, but what I'm about to tell you, it's going to be difficult to hear. More difficult than watching the man I loved choose another woman?" The words came out sharper than intended. "More difficult than running for my life while pregnant and alone? Try me." Damon flinched. He didn't choose her. Not really. Not consciously. The world tilted. "What?" The night of the announcement, Damon's jaw tightened. He was drugged. We didn't realize it until weeks later, but someone on the council had been dosing his wine with a compound designed to suppress his wolf, to make him malleable, suggestible. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was saying. "That's impossible," I whispered. I felt him through the bond. He was there. He was aware. His human side was aware, Damon corrected, but his wolf, the part that recognized you as his mate, was completely suppressed. The part of him that would have fought the council, that would have refused their demands, was locked away. All that was left was the king, and the king was told his duty required him to marry Lyanna Ashford. "No," I shook my head, backing away. "No, I would have felt that. The bond was being actively blocked." Damon's voice was gentle but firm. The same witch who provided the drug also created a barrier. You couldn't feel him, and he couldn't feel you. It's why the connection went silent. Why you thought he'd severed it. My legs gave out, and Margaret was there instantly, guiding me to a chair. The baby kicked frantically, responding to my distress, and I pressed both hands to my stomach, trying to calm them, trying to calm myself. "You're lying," I managed. "You're making excuses for him." "I wish I were." Damon crouched in front of me, his amber eyes sincere. "But we found the evidence 3 weeks after the wedding. The wine bottles, the witch's payment records, correspondence between her and 3 council members who wanted to ensure the king made the right choice. They knew about you, knew he'd marked you, and they knew the only way to force him into a political marriage was to remove his wolf from the equation." The room spun. All those months I'd thought he'd abandoned me. All those nights I'd cried myself to sleep, believing he'd chosen duty over love, that I hadn't been enough, that our bond had meant nothing, and he'd been drugged, manipulated. His wolf suppressed while they paraded eligible females in front of him and demanded he choose. What happened to them? My voice sounded strange, distant. The council members, dead. Damon's expression went cold. Cale killed them himself the moment he realized what they'd done. Ripped them apart in the throne room. It's part of why the rumors about his madness started. Witnesses saw him execute 3 of his most senior advisors and didn't understand why. And the witch? Executed. Publicly. He paused. It wasn't pretty. Good. The vicious thought surprised me with its intensity, but I didn't take it back. The marriage, I said slowly, dreading the answer. Did he? He's never touched her. Damon's voice was absolute. Never even shared chambers. The wedding was completed because breaking the alliance after the ceremony would have meant war. But he's made it very clear to everyone, including Liana, that she's queen in title only. The marriage will be annulled the moment the political situation stabilizes enough to allow it. Relief flooded through me so strongly I felt dizzy with it. He hadn't touched her, hadn't been with her, hadn't replaced me in his bed while I'd been suffering alone. But the relief was immediately followed by rage. 6 months, I said, my voice shaking. I've been gone for 6 months, Damon. Pregnant and alone and thinking he'd thrown me away like garbage. Why didn't he come after me immediately? Why didn't he send word? Send someone to explain? He tried. Damon's expression turned pained. The moment the drug wore off and his wolf returned, he knew something was wrong. Knew you were gone. But the bond was still blocked. The witch's spell didn't break when she died. It took weeks to find someone powerful enough to unravel it. And by then you'd hidden yourself so completely that even with the bond restored, he couldn't pinpoint your location. The bond has been silent for months, I protested. On your end, yes. The witch designed it that way you couldn't feel him, couldn't sense that he was searching, couldn't know he was going insane trying to find you. Damon's voice dropped, but his side never went silent. He's felt everything. Your pain, your grief, your loneliness, and he couldn't reach you, couldn't comfort you, couldn't explain. It's been destroying him. The bond pulsed as if confirming his words, and suddenly I could feel it, all the emotions Cale had been broadcasting that I'd been unable to receive. Months of desperation and self-hatred and fear that he'd lost me forever. Months of fighting his own counsel, searching every settlement, following every lead that might bring him closer to me. Months of suffering that matched my own. I didn't know, I whispered. I thought he'd chosen her. Thought he'd decided I wasn't worth the political trouble. You're the only thing he's ever chosen for himself, Damon said quietly. Everything else, the crown, the throne, the responsibilities, those were thrust on him. But you were his. The one thing in his entire life that was just for him. And when they took that away, when they manipulated him into betraying you, he shook his head. I've known Cale for 20 years, and I've never seen him like this. The madness the traitors talk about, it's real. He's barely holding himself together, and the only thing keeping him from going completely feral is the knowledge that you're alive and he's getting closer to finding you. As if summoned by the words, I felt Cale's presence intensify through the bond. He was closer now, probably right outside, held back only by Damon's orders to let him talk to me first. He's outside, I said unnecessarily. He is. Damon stood, giving me space. And he's been waiting 6 months for the chance to explain, to apologize, to beg your forgiveness if that's what it takes. He paused at the door. But the choice is yours. You don't owe him anything. If you want to walk away, I'll make sure he respects that. If you want more time, we'll give it to you. You're in control here. Control. What a joke. I'd had no control since the moment I'd met Cale by that creek. No control over falling in love with him. No control over the bond that tied us together. No control over the political machinations that had torn us apart. But maybe Damon was right. Maybe I did have control over what happened next. I need to think, I said finally. He nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Margaret moved to sit beside me, her hand warm on my shoulder. What are you going to do? I don't know. I looked down at my stomach, where our child was still moving restlessly. He was drugged, manipulated. It wasn't his fault. But you're still hurt, Margaret observed gently. I'm still hurt, I agreed, and angry, and terrified. What if it happens again? What if the council finds another way to separate us? Another reason why I'm not suitable? What if... The door to the shop flew open, but it wasn't Cale or Damon. It was 5 males I didn't recognize, moving with predatory grace, their eyes flashing between human and wolf, and they were armed. Scene 10. Assassin's attack. The first blade was aimed at my throat. I moved on instinct, rolling sideways off the chair, grabbing Margaret and pulling her down with me as steel whistled through the air where my head had been a second before. The baby kicked frantically, and my wolf surged to the surface, protective and vicious in a way I'd never felt before. They'd come for me. For us. Stay down, I hissed at Margaret, pushing her behind the counter. The assassins spread out, circling, and I could see the moment they registered my pregnancy. One of them smiled cold and cruel. The king's bastard, he sneered. They'll pay extra for both of you. Outside I heard shouting. Damon's voice raised in command, followed by snarls and the sounds of fighting. These 5 had slipped through somehow, gotten past Cale's wolves, and now they were between me and any help. The bond screamed with Cale's rage and terror, but he wasn't here. Wasn't close enough. I was on my own. The assassin lunged, and my wolf exploded to the surface. Not a full shift, I couldn't risk it with the baby, but enough that my nails extended to claws and my speed multiplied. I caught his wrist, twisted, and felt bones snap. His scream filled the shop. The others attacked as one. I moved through them like water, like violence, like something feral and unstoppable. Every maternal instinct I possessed had weaponized itself, and I was no longer the scared girl who'd run from the palace. I was a mother protecting her child, and that made me more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. But there were 5 of them, and 1 of me, and I was pregnant, and hadn't shifted or fought in months. A blade caught my shoulder, slicing deep, and I felt blood pour hot down my arm. The pain was immediate and vicious, but I couldn't stop, couldn't slow down. Had to keep moving, keep fighting, keep them away from my stomach where our baby was depending on me. Another blade, this one aimed low, and I knew with absolute clarity that I couldn't dodge it, that it was going to hit, going to hurt, going to... Power erupted from my hands. Not wolf power, something else. Something I'd kept hidden my entire life because it was forbidden, because wolves who had magic were killed on sight, because admitting I had it would mean death. But I was dying anyway, so I let it out. Silver light exploded from my palms, slamming into the assassins with the force of a hurricane. They flew backward, crashing through walls and windows, their bodies crumpling like paper. The one who'd been about to stab me disintegrated entirely. Nothing left but ash and the smell of burnt flesh. The shop went absolutely silent. I stood in the center of the destruction, breathing hard, my hands still glowing with power that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist, that I'd just revealed in front of witnesses and would absolutely get me killed if word spread. Margaret stared at me from behind the counter, her eyes wide but not afraid. "Well," she said faintly, "that explains a few things." Outside, the fighting had stopped. I could feel Cale's approach through the bond he was running. Desperate, had felt my pain and fear through our connection and was coming to save me even though I'd already saved myself. The door burst open, and Damon appeared first, his eyes taking in the destruction with professional assessment. Then Cale was there, shoving past his beta, his eyes wild and gold and absolutely feral. He saw the blood on my shoulder, saw me standing in the wreckage, power still crackling around my fingers, saw our child safe beneath my protective hands, and he dropped to his knees. The Alpha King knelt before me in the ruins of Margaret's shop, and the world held its breath. He looked wrecked, absolutely destroyed. His eyes were more wolf than human, his entire body vibrating with barely leashed violence. But he didn't move toward me, didn't reach out, didn't do anything except stare at me like I was a miracle he'd stopped believing in. "You're hurt," he managed, his voice rough and broken. I'm fine. My hands were still glowing, the forbidden magic I'd revealed refusing to dissipate while I still felt threatened. And Kale, despite being my mate, despite being the father of my child, felt like a threat right now. Felt like something dangerous and unpredictable that I couldn't quite trust. Your shoulder. We'll heal. I stepped back as he started to rise. Don't. He froze, still on his knees, and I saw something in his eyes that looked like devastation. Please, he breathed. Please let me help you. Help me? The laugh that escaped was bitter and sharp. Like you helped me 6 months ago? Like you helped when you stood in that hall and chose her? I was drugged. His voice cracked. I didn't. I couldn't. My wolf was suppressed. I didn't know what I was doing. Damon told me. I pressed my hand to my bleeding shoulder, using pressure to slow the flow. Told me about the conspiracy, the manipulation, all of it. And I believe him. I believe you were drugged. Hope flared in his eyes. But that doesn't erase what I went through, I continued, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Doesn't erase the pain of watching you choose another woman. Doesn't erase 6 months of thinking you'd thrown me away. Doesn't erase being pregnant and alone and terrified. I know. He bowed his head, and I realized with a start that he was crying. The Alpha King was on his knees in front of me with tears streaming down his face. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. I've spent every moment since I woke up from that drug trying to find you, trying to fix this, trying to... To what? I demanded. To make it better? To erase what happened? You can't, Kale. You can't take back that night. Can't take back the bond dying. Can't take back the fact that somewhere in the capital there's a woman who thinks she's your wife. She's not. His voice was fierce. She's nothing. A political arrangement I'm working to dissolve. I've never touched her, never... I know. I cut him off. Damon told me that too. And I'm glad. But it doesn't change the fact that you're still married to her. That walking away from that marriage means political consequences you might not be able to handle. I don't care. He looked up at me, and the raw emotion in his eyes was almost painful to witness. Let the territories withdraw their alliances. Let the council object. Let the whole fucking kingdom burn if that's what it takes. You're my mate. You're carrying my child. Nothing else matters. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, like they recognized their father's voice. Kale's eyes dropped to my stomach, and his expression transformed into something reverent and awed and absolutely heartbroken. May I? His voice was barely a whisper. May I touch? Please. I need to know they're real, that you're both real. Every instinct I had screamed at me to refuse, to keep him at a distance until I'd had time to process everything, to heal, to decide if I could forgive him. But the bond was singing between us, and my wolf was whining with the need to be close to him, and the baby was moving like they were trying to reach through my skin to their father. One hand, I said finally. And if I tell you to stop, you stop immediately. Yes. He moved slowly, carefully, like I was something wild that might spook. Anything you want. Anything. He reached out with a hand that shook, giving me plenty of time to change my mind. When I didn't pull away, he pressed his palm gently against the swell of my stomach. The bond exploded with light. I felt him through it suddenly, all the emotions he'd been suppressing, all the pain and fear and desperate love he'd been carrying for months. Felt his wolf howl with recognition as it finally connected with the child we'd made. Felt his absolute devastation at everything I'd been through alone, and felt his determination to spend the rest of his life making it right. The baby kicked directly into his palm, and Kale made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. They're strong, he breathed. So strong. They have to be. My voice was thick with unshed tears. They've got a complicated family. He looked up at me, and I saw my own pain reflected in his eyes. I love you, he said simply. I've loved you since the moment I found you by that creek, and I will love you until the day I die. What they did, what I did while under that drug, it doesn't change that. It can't change that. Love isn't always enough, I whispered. I know. He kept his hand on my stomach, like he couldn't bear to break the connection. But I'm asking for a chance to prove it can be. Not today, not even tomorrow, but eventually. Let me fix this. Let me dismantle the council that tried to separate us. Let me dissolve a marriage that should never have happened. Let me build a kingdom where you and our child are safe and valued and protected. And if I can't forgive you, the question hurt to ask, if the damage is too deep, then I'll love you anyway. His voice was absolute. I'll give you anything you need. Money, protection, a home, space. I'll stay away if that's what you want. But I'll never stop fighting for us. Never stop hoping that someday you'll be able to look at me without seeing that night. I wanted to hate him. Wanted to hold on to my anger and hurt and use it as armor against the feelings that threatened to overwhelm me. But I couldn't, because despite everything, despite the pain and betrayal and months of suffering, I still loved him. Still felt the bond pulling me toward him like gravity. Still saw the male I'd fallen for beneath the crown and the politics and the terrible choices that had been made. I'm not coming back to the palace, I said finally. His face fell, but he nodded. I understand. Not yet, I corrected. Not until you've dealt with the council. Not until the marriage is dissolved. Not until I can be sure this won't happen again. Hope flickered in his eyes. But eventually, maybe. I covered his hand with mine, both of us touching the child that connected us. If you can prove you meant what you said, that we matter more than politics, that you'll choose us even when it's hard, I will. The words were a vow. Every time, for the rest of my life. The baby kicked again, and despite everything, I felt a smile tug at my lips. They like you. They have excellent taste. He smiled back, tentative and fragile. Just like their mother. Don't push it, I warned, but there was no heat in it. Margaret cleared her throat from where she'd been quietly observing. Perhaps we should address the bleeding shoulder before we continue this reunion? Cale's eyes went immediately to my wound, and his expression darkened. Who did this? Dead, I said simply. I handled it. His gaze swept over the destruction, the shattered walls, the scorch marks, the ash that had once been an assassin. Then back to me, to my hands where silver light still flickered faintly. You have magic, he said, not a question. Yes. I lifted my chin, defiant. Forbidden magic that should get me executed. Is that going to be a problem? No. His voice was fierce. It's going to be an asset, and anyone who tries to harm you because of it will learn exactly why I'm called the Alpha King. Despite myself, I felt warmth bloom in my chest. Protective much. You're my mate carrying my child who just survived an assassination attempt. His eyes flashed gold. Protective doesn't begin to cover it. Well? Margaret stood, brushing off her skirts. This has been eventful. Your Majesty, if you'd like to help your mate upstairs so I can properly treat that wound, I'd appreciate it. And the rest of you, she looked pointedly at Damon and the other wolves who'd crowded into the doorway, can start cleaning up this mess. Cale looked at me, asking permission. I hesitated, then nodded. He stood slowly, keeping one hand protectively over our child, and offered me his other arm. I took it, hating how right it felt to touch him again, how my wolf immediately settled at the contact. This wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a beginning. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. We left Millbrook before dawn. Cale had wanted to stay longer, wanted to give me time to heal properly, but the assassination attempt had changed everything. Whoever had sent those mails knew where I was, and staying put meant putting the entire village at risk. Margaret had argued, bless her, but even she could see the logic. Come back when it's safe, she'd said, pressing a bag of herbs and supplies into my hands. And bring that baby to meet me. I will, I'd promised, meaning it. Now I sat astride a massive black horse. Cale's arms caged around me as he controlled the reins, his chest pressed against my back. He'd insisted on this arrangement despite my protests that I was perfectly capable of riding alone. Said it was safer, that he could protect me better this way. I suspected he just needed the contact. Needed to feel me solid and real against him after months of searching. The bond hummed between us, stronger now that we were touching, and I could feel his hyper-awareness of every breath I took. Every time the baby moved, his entire body would tense with wonder and protective instinct. It should have been suffocating. Instead, it felt like coming home. "You're thinking too loud," he murmured against my ear, his breath warm. "I'm not thinking anything." "Liar." His arms tightened fractionally. "I can feel you through the bond, remember? You're spiraling." I was. Spiraling about what came next. About whether I was making the right choice coming with him. About whether I could really trust that this time would be different. "Tell me about the bond dreams," I said instead, deflecting. He went still. "How do you know about those?" "Damon mentioned them. Said you'd been having them." I tilted my head back to look at him. "What are they?" For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, and I felt his reluctance through the bond not to tell me, but to admit just how badly he'd been suffering. "They started the night you left," he said quietly. "At first I thought they were just nightmares. I'd dream I could feel you through the bond, feel your pain and fear and loneliness. Wake up reaching for you only to remember you were gone." My chest tightened. "But then I realized they weren't nightmares," he continued. "They were real. The bond was trying to connect us even through the witch's block. Every night I'd fall asleep and find myself in your dreams, watch you in that village, see you working in the shop, feel your hand on your stomach and realize—" His voice cracked. "Realize you were pregnant and I wasn't there." "You saw me?" I twisted in his arms, nearly unseating us both. "In Millbrook? You knew where I was?" "No." His hand steadied me, kept me safe despite the horse's sidestep. "The dreams weren't clear enough. I could see you but not your surroundings, hear your voice but not the names of places. It was torture knowing you were alive, watching you grow our child, but unable to reach you. Why didn't you tell me?" But even as I asked, I knew. "The block. I couldn't feel you in my dreams. You couldn't feel anything from my end." His voice was rough with old pain, but I felt everything from yours. Every tear, every moment of grief, every time you touched your stomach and whispered to our baby about their father. "Oh God, you heard that?" "All of it." He pressed his forehead to the back of my neck, and I felt moisture that might have been tears. "Heard you tell them I was a king and a coward. Heard you promise to make sure they knew they were wanted. Heard you cry yourself to sleep missing someone you thought had abandoned you. Kaol, it nearly killed me," he whispered. "Every night, watching you suffer and being unable to help, unable to tell you the truth, unable to hold you." I turned in his arms properly now, forcing him to stop the horse. We were far enough from the others. Damon and his wolves had given us space that no one would overhear. "I'm sorry," I said, framing his face with my hands. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." "Don't." His eyes were fierce. "Don't apologize for my failures. For what they did to us. Then don't apologize for mine." I held his gaze. "We both suffered. We both survived. And we're both here now." He kissed me then, soft and careful and achingly tender. Not demanding, not claiming, just grateful, like he still couldn't quite believe I was real, that I was here, that I was giving him this chance. When we broke apart, I stayed close, our foreheads touching. "The dreams," I said. "Are you still having them?" "Every night." His thumb brushed my cheekbone. "But now they're different. Now when I fall asleep, I don't just watch you suffer. I see you fighting assassins with forbidden magic. See you protecting our child with a fierceness that makes my wolf howl with pride. See the woman I fell in love with becoming something even stronger." "I had to be strong," I said quietly. "Didn't have a choice." "You always had a choice." His voice was absolute. "You could have broken. Could have let the grief consume you. Could have lost yourself in the pain. But you didn't. You survived. And you made sure our child survived. And you became the kind of female who destroys assassins with silver light. Despite everything, I felt a smile tug at my lips. "You're not afraid of the magic?" "I'm in awe of it." He pulled back enough to look at me properly. Do you know how rare it is? How powerful you must be to have hidden it your entire life. Rare enough that I'll be executed if the wrong people find out. They won't. His voice went hard, dangerous. Anyone who tries to harm you for your gifts will answer to me. And I promise, little wolf, that's not a conversation they'll survive. The possessive protectiveness in his tone should have annoyed me, should have made me bristle and remind him I could take care of myself. Instead, it made me feel safe, cherished. Like maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. We should keep moving, I said, not quite ready to examine that feeling. He nodded and turned us back to the path, settling me against his chest once more. The rhythm of the horse, the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart against my back, it all combined to make me drowsy, despite the danger we were riding toward. Sleep, he murmured. I've got you. Can't sleep on a horse. You can when you haven't slept properly in 6 months. His arms tightened protectively. I can feel your exhaustion through the bond. Let me carry it for a while. Kale, please. The word was soft, almost broken. Let me take care of you. Even if it's just this. Even if it's just keeping you safe while you rest. I should have argued. Should have maintained my independence and proved I didn't need him. But I was tired. So tired. And his arms felt safe. And the bond was humming contentedly. And for the first time in months, I wasn't alone. So I let my eyes close and my body relax against his, and I slept. In my dreams, I felt him there, not watching from a distance but beside me, his presence warm and solid and real. Felt his wonder as our child kicked in my sleep. Felt his love wrap around us both like a shield. And for the first time since that terrible night in the Great Hall, I let myself hope. I woke to chaos. The sound of galloping hooves, shouted orders, Kale's arms tight around me as our horse surged forward at a pace that should have been reckless. Through the bond, I felt his rage and fear in equal measure. What's happening? I gasped, trying to orient myself. Message from the capital. His voice was clipped, controlled, but I could hear the fury underneath. There's been a coup. The words took a moment to penetrate. What? The council, what's left of it, moved against me while I was searching for you. He urged the horse faster, and I gripped his arms for stability. They've declared me unfit to rule. Said the obsessive search for a lost mistress proved I'd gone mad. They've seized the palace and taken hostages. My blood ran cold. Who? His jaw tightened. Everyone still loyal to me. My personal guard. The servants who helped search. And, he paused, and I felt his conflict through the bond. Liana, your wife. The word tasted bitter. A political prisoner I'm legally bound to, he corrected, but still someone under my protection, someone they're using as leverage to force me to abdicate. I pressed my hand to my stomach, where the baby was moving restlessly, sensing the tension. What do they want? Me to step down, acknowledge Liana's father as regent until a proper heir can be chosen. His voice dripped with contempt. Basically, hand over the kingdom to the southern territories and disappear. And if you don't, they'll execute the hostages, starting with the servants who were most loyal to me. Good people. People who'd helped him search for me, who'd believed in our bond, who'd risked their positions to support their king's choice to follow his heart instead of politics. People who would die because of me. How long do we have? I asked. 3 days. We crested a hill, and I could see the capital in the distance, smoke rising from several locations, the palace flags replaced with colors I didn't recognize. They sent the ultimatum this morning. By sunset on the 3rd day, I either abdicate or they start killing. Damon appeared beside us, his horse lathered with sweat. The southern territories have mobilized, he reported grimly. Liana's father is using this as an excuse to position his forces around the capital. If we try to retake the palace by force, we'll start a war. Then we don't use force, Kale said. We negotiate. With what leverage? Damon demanded. They have the palace, the hostages, and the backing of half the territories. We have... He stopped, his eyes flicking to me. Careful. Kale's voice went deadly soft. Finish that sentence and you'll regret it. I wasn't going to, Damon sighed. We have loyalty and the law on our side. But the council is arguing that your actions, the executions, the obsessive search, the abandonment of your duties prove you're unfit. They're using every action you took to find your mate as evidence of madness. The irony wasn't lost on me. The things he'd done out of love, they were twisting into proof of instability. There has to be another way, I said. Both males looked at me. What if we gave them what they wanted? I continued, the idea forming even as I spoke. Not the abdication, but the appearance of stability. What if we showed them that Kale's search wasn't madness, but the actions of a bonded male finding his true mate? They'll say you're using magic to control him, Damon pointed out. The moment they learn about your abilities, then we don't tell them about the magic yet. I looked at Kale. We tell them about the bond, about the drug, about the conspiracy to force you into a false marriage. We expose the council members who tried to manipulate their king and make this about restoring honor to the throne, not about me. It won't work, Kale said flatly. The moment I reveal you as my true mate, they'll demand proof. And when I provide it, when I show them our bond, they'll see our child. See that I conceived an heir with someone other than my legal wife. That alone is grounds for scandal, possibly abdication. So we make the scandal work for us. I twisted to face him fully. You said the marriage to Liana was never consummated. That means it can be annulled on grounds of non-completion. You reveal me, reveal our child, reveal the bond, and you demand the council recognize what they tried to destroy. You make this about them stealing your choice, not about you going mad. It's risky, Damon said, but I could see him considering it. But it might work. If we can prove the conspiracy, prove the drug, prove that the previous council acted against supernatural law by interfering with a true mate bond. We make them the villains, Kale finished. Not me. Exactly. I pressed my hand over his heart. But it requires you to claim me publicly, to acknowledge our child, to risk everything on the hope that the territories will respect the bond more than they fear the scandal. We made camp an hour outside the capital. Kale had wanted to push straight through, but Damon had convinced him that arriving exhausted and angry would only strengthen the council's argument about his instability. So we'd stopped, built fires, and tried to plan for every contingency. I sat away from the main group, one hand on my stomach, staring at the distant lights of the city. Our city, the place where I'd fallen in love and had my heart broken, and learned that fairy tales don't always have happy endings. The place where, in 3 days, innocent people would start dying unless we figured out how to stop it. You're spiraling again. I didn't turn at Kael's voice, just kept staring at the horizon. I'm thinking, dangerous activity. He settled beside me, close but not touching, respecting my space. Want to share? I could end this, I said quietly. He went very still. What? They want proof you're stable. Proof you can put duty above personal desire. I finally looked at him. What if I gave them that proof? What if I walked away publicly, denounced the bond, claimed I was releasing you from any obligation to me or our child? No. The word was immediate and absolute. It would work, I pressed. You could claim you'd been searching for me to ensure my safety, not because you wanted me back. You could reconcile with Liana, stabilize the kingdom, and— No, he grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to face him fully. I will never ask you to sacrifice yourself for politics. Not again, not after what we've been through. People will die, Kale. My voice cracked. Good people who were loyal to you. How can I live with that? How can I let them die just so I can have my happy ending? And how can I live with losing you? He shot back. How can I rule a kingdom built on the sacrifice of my mate? How can I look our child in the eye someday and explain that I traded their mother for a crown? You're the king. I'm your mate first. His eyes blazed gold. Everything else, the crown, the throne, the kingdom, it's all meaningless without you. Don't you understand that yet? I've spent 6 months going insane because you were gone. 6 months barely holding myself together. If I lose you now, if I let you walk away thinking it's for the greater good, I will go mad. For real this time. And then what good is a king who can't even think straight? So what's the alternative? I demanded. We storm the palace? Start a war? Let them execute hostages while we play politics? We fight. His voice was steel. We expose the conspiracy, reveal the truth, and we trust that the majority of wolves will honor the mate bond over political convenience. And if they don't, his jaw set, then we burn it all down and build something better from the ashes. You can't mean that. I mean every word. He pulled me close, his hand cradling my face. I love you. I love our child. And I will not sacrifice either of you for a throne that's not worth having if it costs me my soul. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to let his certainty wash away my doubts and fears. But I'd seen the reports, knew how many territories were already unstable, knew that war would mean deaths beyond just the hostages, would mean children orphaned, villages destroyed, innocent lives ruined because their king chose love over duty. Could I really live with that? Through the bond, I felt his determination, his absolute refusal to compromise on this. Felt his love like a physical force, wrapping around me and our child with protective fierceness. And I felt his fear buried deep, but there nonetheless that I would choose nobility over us. That I would walk away thinking I was saving him when really I'd be destroying us both. I'm not going anywhere, I said finally, the words both a promise and a surrender. I love you too much to watch you rule a kingdom that cost you everything. But I pressed my hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat race. If there's a way to save those hostages that doesn't require war, we take it, even if it's dangerous, even if it puts me at risk. No, you don't get to decide that, I interrupted. I'm not a fragile thing that needs protecting. I'm a female with forbidden magic who can defend herself and her child. And if I can use that to save innocent lives, then that's what I'm going to do. His eyes searched mine, and I saw the war in him, the king who understood strategy, versus the mate who would rather burn the world than risk me. What are you thinking? He asked carefully. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that the council is using hostages as leverage because they assume you'll negotiate rather than risk lives. They think they have all the power. They do have the power, he pointed out. They control the palace. They control the building, I corrected, but we control the narrative. What if we gave them exactly what they think they want me? Surrendering, walking into their trap, and then we turn the trap against them. Absolutely not. He stood abruptly, pacing. You are not offering yourself as bait. I'm offering myself as a solution. I struggled to my feet, following him. They want proof you're not obsessed with me? Fine. I walk in, publicly denounce the bond, claim I'm releasing you. In front of witnesses, in front of the whole council, I make it look like you've won, like you're choosing duty. And then what? He demanded. They have you. They can kill you, imprison you, use you against me. They won't. I grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop and look at me, because the moment I'm inside, the moment they think they've won, I reveal the truth. The drug, the conspiracy, the fact that the previous council tried to destroy a sacred mate bond. I expose them in front of everyone. Territories, witnesses, guards. I make them the villains. Using yourself as proof. His voice was flat. Standing in front of the very wolves who wanted you gone, pregnant with my child, and hoping they don't just kill you on the spot. They won't kill a pregnant female in front of witnesses, I said, more confidently than I felt. It would turn every territory against them. And once the truth is out, once everyone knows what they did, they'll have no choice but to back down. Or they'll panic and execute everyone to prevent the truth from spreading. He cupped my face, his eyes desperate. Please don't ask me to risk you like this. Ask anything else. Demand I abdicate. Demand I give up the crown. Demand I walk away from everything. But don't ask me to send you into danger. I love you, I said, the words fierce and sure. But I will not be protected at the cost of my soul. I will not stand by while innocent people die because I was too scared to act. That's not who I am, Kale, and it's not who I want to be for our child. He stared at me for a long moment, and through the bond I felt his anguish, his pride at my courage, and his terror at my plan. his absolute certainty that he couldn't lose me and his growing acceptance that he might not have a choice. "There has to be another way," he whispered. "If you can think of one, I'm listening." I pressed my hand to his chest over his heart. "But we're running out of time, and sometimes the only way forward is through the fire." He closed his eyes, and I felt his surrender through the bond. Not acceptance, never that, but acknowledgement that I'd made my choice, and he loved me too much to take it from me. "If you do this," he said finally, opening his eyes, "you don't go in alone. I'm there. Damon's there. Every wolf loyal to us is there. And at the first sign of danger, the first hint that they're going to hurt you, we tear that palace apart. Deal." I stood on my toes and kissed him, pouring everything I couldn't say into the contact. My love, my fear, my determination to save his kingdom, even if it cost me everything. When we broke apart, his eyes were gold, his wolf close to the surface. 2 days, he said. "We have 2 days to prepare, to gather evidence, rally support, and plan for every possible outcome. And then we walk into that palace together and we end this." Together, I agreed. Through the bond, I felt his love wrap around me like armor, and I prayed it would be enough to keep us both alive. The palace gates opened at dawn on the 3rd day. We walked through them together, Kale at my side, Damon and 50 loyal wolves at our backs. The courtyard was packed with witnesses, council members, territory representatives, guards whose loyalty was unclear, and standing on the palace steps, surrounded by her father's warriors, was Lyanna. She looked exactly as I remembered, beautiful, composed, every inch the queen she'd been raised to be. But when her eyes met mine, when she saw my swollen belly and the protective way Kale's hand rested on my lower back, something cracked in her perfect facade. "So the rumors are true," she said, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "The king's whore has returned," Kale growled, but I squeezed his hand, stopping him. "I'm not here to fight you," I called back. "I'm here to reveal the truth." "What truth?" Lord Ashford, Lyanna's father, stepped forward, his expression contemptuous. "That you seduced our king? Used your wiles to distract him from his duties? We already know, girl. The entire kingdom knows he went mad searching for you." "He went searching for his true mate," I corrected, letting my voice ring clear. "The mate he was drugged into forgetting. The mate your council tried to erase." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Lies," Ashford spat. "You'll say anything to justify your existence. Then let me prove it." I stepped forward, away from Kale's protective presence. "I'll submit to any test. Any truth seer, any magic, reader, anyone you trust. Let them examine me, examine the bond, and determine if I'm lying." "We don't need tests to know what you are," another council member declared. "You're a nobody, a distraction, and you carry a bastard that threatens the legitimacy of—" "Careful." Kale's voice was death itself. "Call my child a bastard again and I'll show you exactly how mad I can become." The temperature in the courtyard dropped. I felt it through the bond, his wolf surging forward, barely leashed, ready to tear apart anyone who threatened us. Felt his control fracturing under the weight of their insults and his protective instincts. We were losing this. The crowd was hostile, the council entrenched in their position. Words weren't going to be enough, so I made a choice. I let my wolf out. Not a full shift, I'd been holding her back for months, terrified of what the transformation might do to the baby. But I couldn't hold her anymore. She was done hiding, done being denied, done letting humans and politics and fear dictate our lives. The shift hit me like lightning. Pain exploded through every nerve as bones reformed, as skin became fur, as my body transformed into something both familiar and terrifying. I heard Kyle shout my name, felt his panic through the bond, but I couldn't stop. The wolf was coming, whether I was ready or not. And the baby, oh God, the baby. But instead of pain, I felt power. Felt the child inside me strengthen rather than weaken. Felt their own wolf nature rising to meet mine. They were shifter-born, conceived by 2 wolves, and the transformation didn't hurt them. It made them stronger. I completed the shift on 4 legs, larger than I'd ever been. my fur silver white and gleaming in the dawn light. And from my body, from the magic I'd kept hidden for so long, silver light poured out like a beacon. The courtyard went dead silent. I'd shifted while pregnant and survived. More than survived, I was magnificent, powerful, undeniable. I was his equal. Through the bond, I felt Kale's shock turn to awe, turn to fierce pride, felt his wolf howl with recognition and approval, felt him understand what I was showing them, that I wasn't some weak human or helpless omega who needed protection. I was an alpha female carrying an alpha heir, and I was done apologizing for existing. Ashford recovered first, his face twisting with rage. Witchcraft! She uses forbidden magic to... He didn't finish. Because his warriors, the ones who'd been surrounding Liana, the ones who were supposed to be loyal only to the southern territories, suddenly attacked. Not us. The hostages. It was a trap within a trap. They'd never intended to negotiate. They'd been waiting for the moment when Kale was distracted, when his attention was split between me and the threats around us, and they'd planned to execute the hostages while he watched, while he broke. But they hadn't counted on me. I moved faster than thought, silver light exploding from my wolf form like a shockwave. It slammed into the warriors mid-strike, throwing them back, creating a barrier between them and the innocent people they'd been about to kill. Then Kale was beside me, shifted into his massive black wolf, larger than any I'd ever seen, and we were moving together, fighting together. Perfect synchronization born from a bond that had survived manipulation and separation and 6 months of hell. His teeth found a warrior's throat while my magic shattered another's weapons. He blocked an attack meant for me while I deflected a blade aimed at him. We moved like a single entity, protecting each other, protecting the hostages, dismantling Ashford's forces with brutal efficiency. The other wolves, Kale's loyal guards, Damon's fighters, joined the fray, and suddenly the courtyard was chaos, fur and fangs and silver light, and the sound of combat echoing off ancient stones. Through it all, I felt our bond burning bright and true, felt Kale's wolf in perfect harmony with mine, felt our child safe and strong inside me, protected by magic and will, and a mother who would burn the world before letting anyone hurt them. This was what they'd tried to destroy. This partnership, this power, this undeniable truth that we were meant to be together, and we were done letting them win. Scene 16. Completion of the bond. The fighting lasted minutes but felt like hours. When it ended, Ashford was on his knees, Damon's teeth at his throat. His warriors were subdued or dead, and the hostages were safe, huddled together but unharmed. I shifted back to human form easier now, like the first shift had broken through some barrier and stood there in the center of the courtyard, naked and pregnant and glowing with residual magic, absolutely unashamed. Kale shifted beside me, equally bare, and immediately moved to shield my body with his. "Don't," I said quietly, stopping him. "Let them see. Let them see exactly what they tried to destroy." He hesitated, then stepped beside me instead of in front of me. Equal. United. The witnesses stared in stunned silence. "The previous council drugged your king," I said, my voice carrying in the quiet. "They suppressed his wolf and forced him to choose a political bride over his true mate. When he discovered the truth, when he executed the conspirators, they called him mad, called his search for me obsession, called our bond a distraction." I placed my hand on my stomach, where our child moved visibly beneath my skin. This is what they tried to prevent. An heir conceived in love rather than politics. A bond that makes your king stronger, not weaker. A partnership that could unite territories through truth instead of manipulation. "She's a witch," Ashford spat, even with fangs at his throat, using magic to control him. "Then let's test that theory." I looked at Kale. "Complete the bond. Publicly. Let everyone witness what a true mate connection looks like." His eyes widened. "Are you sure? It's intimate. Exposing. I'm sure." I took his hand, pressed it to my heart. "Show them. Show them what they tried to destroy." He stared at me for a long moment, and through the bond I felt his hesitation war with his desire. The completion ritual was sacred, personal, something mates typically did in private. It would open our souls to each other completely, let everyone present feel the truth of our connection. It would leave us vulnerable, but it would also prove beyond any doubt that what we had was real. Together, he said finally, echoing my words from 2 days ago. He pulled me close, one hand cradling my face, the other protective over our child. When he kissed me, it wasn't gentle or tentative. It was claiming and complete and absolutely certain. The bond exploded. Not just between us, through us, into everyone watching. The completion ritual wasn't just spiritual. It was visible, a golden light that poured from our joined bodies and spread across the courtyard like dawn breaking. And with it came visions. Everyone present suddenly saw what we'd been through, felt what we felt. They saw him finding me by the creek, saw our love growing in secret, saw the claiming bite and the promises we'd made. They felt the bond form, strong and true and sacred. Then they saw the betrayal. Saw the witch administering the drug, saw council members conspiring, saw Kyle's wolf being suppressed while his human mind was manipulated into choosing duty. They felt his confusion, his sense that something was wrong, his inability to fight against the compulsion. They saw me watching from the shadows as he announced his engagement. Felt my heart break. Felt the bond screaming in agony as I ran. They saw 6 months of suffering on both sides. His frantic searching, his bond dreams, his slow descent into madness as he felt me suffering and couldn't reach me, my loneliness, my fear, my determination to survive for our child. They saw the assassination attempt, saw my magic defend our baby, saw the truth of what I was not a witch using forbidden power for evil, but a mother using every gift she had to protect her child. And they saw this moment, saw 2 wolves who'd fought through manipulation and separation and political machinations to stand here together, claiming each other in front of the entire kingdom. Saw that what we had was real. The visions faded, but the golden light remained, wrapping around us like a blessing. I pulled back from Kale just enough to see his face, saw tears streaming down his cheeks matching my own, and felt the bond settle into place completely. No more barriers, no more distance, no more doubt. We were one. The courtyard remained silent for a heartbeat, then another. Then someone started to howl a wolf's cry of acknowledgement and approval. Another joined, then another, until the sound filled the air, wolves recognizing and honoring a completed bond. Even some of Ashford's own people joined the chorus. Liana stepped forward, and the howling quieted. She looked at me, really looked, and I saw the moment she understood. Saw her recognize that she'd never stood a chance, that no political arrangement could compete with a true mate bond. "I want an annulment," she said clearly. "This marriage was forced and unconsummated. I claim the right to dissolve it under supernatural law." Ashford snarled, but she ignored him. "I will not be queen to a king whose heart belongs to another," she continued, "and I will not help my father destroy something sacred just to gain power." She met Kyle's eyes, and I felt his surprise through the bond. "You were kind to me, even when you didn't want to be. You gave me respect I didn't earn. The least I can do is give you your freedom." "Thank you," Kale said quietly. She nodded, then turned and walked away from her father, from the Southern warriors, from the political alliance she'd been raised to fulfill. It was the bravest thing I'd ever seen. Ashford lunged, trying to stop her, but Damon's grip tightened and the male went down hard. "It's over," Kale announced, his voice ringing with alpha command. "Lord Ashford and any council member who participated in the conspiracy will face trial. The hostages are released. And my mate," he pulled me close, his hand protective over our child, "will be acknowledged as the true queen, with all rights and honors that entails. She has magic," someone called from the crowd. "Forbidden magic." "She has gifts," Kale corrected, his voice hard. "Gifts she used to defend innocent lives. Gifts that will be honored in this kingdom, not punished. Any law that criminalizes the defense of children and mates is hereby revoked." The crowd murmured, but no one protested. Through the bond, I felt Kael's determination, his absolute refusal to compromise on this. Felt his love wrapping around me in our childlike armor. Felt, for the first time since that terrible night in the Great Hall, like maybe we'd actually won. "I love you," I whispered against his chest. "I love you too, little wolf." He pressed a kiss to my temple. My queen, my mate, my everything. The bond hummed with contentment, complete at last. And somewhere inside me, our child kicked in what I chose to interpret as approval. The trials took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of testimony, evidence, and watching wolves who'd conspired against their king face justice. I attended every session, sitting beside Kael on a throne that had been brought in specifically for me, my hand resting on my growing belly while we listened to the truth unfold piece by piece. Lord Ashford had orchestrated everything. The drug, the witch, the manipulation, all of it designed to force Kael into a marriage that would give the Southern Territories control over the crown. He'd seen Kael's bond with me as a threat to his plans, and had moved to eliminate it before it could be formalized. What he hadn't counted on was the bond being strong enough to survive his interference. "You destroyed my life," Ashford spat during his testimony, glaring at me with undisguised hatred. "Ruined years of planning, all because you couldn't accept that you weren't good enough for a king." "I destroyed nothing," I replied calmly, feeling Kael's support through the bond. "You destroyed yourself the moment you decided to drug and manipulate your king. The moment you interfered with a sacred mate bond. The moment you chose power over honor." He lunged then, or tried to. The guards restraining him held firm, and Kael was on his feet in an instant, his power flooding the room with enough force to make every wolf present drop their eyes in submission. "You will not threaten my mate," Kael said, his voice deadly quiet. "You will not look at her. You will not speak to her. You have lost that privilege along with everything else." Ashford slumped, defeated, and I felt a vicious satisfaction through the bond that matched my own. The council voted unanimously for execution. I thought I'd feel conflicted watching him die. Thought some part of me would flinch from the violence, from the finality of it. But when Kael delivered the killing blow himself, swift and clean, all I felt was relief. One less threat to our family. The other conspirators faced similar fates. The remaining council members who'd known about the plot but hadn't acted to stop it were stripped of their positions and exiled. New council members were appointed wolves Kael trusted, who'd proven their loyalty during the search. And slowly, carefully, the kingdom began to heal. The territories that had threatened to withdraw their alliances reconsidered once they understood the full scope of the conspiracy. Several alphas came forward to formally apologize for doubting Kael, for believing the rumors of madness without questioning their source. "You fought for your mate," one old alpha told him during a formal dinner. "Risked everything to find her. That's not madness. That's what every true wolf would do. We should have known better." Kael accepted their apologies with grace, but through the bond I felt his lingering anger. These were wolves who'd stood by while he was being manipulated, who'd been too concerned with politics to question whether their king was actually unstable or just desperately in love. "Let it go," I murmured that night, curled against his side in our chambers. Our chambers now, not his alone. They didn't know, and holding on to anger will only poison what we're trying to build. "They should have known," he insisted, his hand protective over my stomach. "Should have trusted me." "Maybe." I pressed a kiss to his jaw. "But we can't change the past. We can only move forward." He sighed, pulling me closer. "When did you get so wise?" "When I spent 6 months surviving on my own and realized that bitterness doesn't keep you warm at night." Through the bond, I felt his guilt flare as it always did when I referenced those months, and I mentally kicked myself for bringing it up. "Stop," I said firmly. We agreed. No more guilt over what happened. We both suffered, we both survived, and we're both here now. That's what matters. "I know." He buried his face in my hair, breathing me in. "But sometimes I think about you alone in that village, pregnant and scared, and I want to burn the entire world down for not protecting you." "I protected myself," I reminded him. "And our child. We're stronger than you give us credit for. I know that too. His hand moved over my belly, where the baby was doing their usual evening acrobatics. You're the strongest person I've ever met, little wolf. Stronger than me. Not stronger, just different. I captured his hand, laced our fingers together. We're partners. Remember? You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. Neither do you. I know. I smiled against his chest. Took me a while to accept that, but I know. The weeks passed, and the kingdom truly did begin to stabilize. The Southern Territories, under new leadership after Ashford's execution, pledged loyalty to the crown. The border disputes quieted as wolves realized their king was focused and present, not distracted or mad. And the crops which had begun failing during the months of political chaos suddenly recovered. It wasn't magic in the traditional sense, but it felt like it. Fields that had been withering came back to life. Harvests that should have failed produced abundantly. And the farmers spoke in whispers about the king's mate bringing blessings to the land. It's the bond, Kale explained when I asked him about it. A completed mate bond between ruling alphas strengthens everything: the pack, the territory, even the land itself. It's old magic, older than any of us, tied to the idea that a kingdom reflects the health of its rulers. So when our bond was broken, the kingdom suffered. And now that it's complete, everything flourishes. He smiled, pulling me into his arms despite my protesting about my size. You're not just my queen in title, love. You're the heart of this kingdom. Everything grows strong because you're here. No pressure, I muttered, but I felt warmth bloom in my chest at his words. The bond between us had settled into something comfortable and constant, a presence I was never without. I could feel Kale's emotions as clearly as my own, knew when he was stressed or happy or aroused without him saying a word. And he could feel me the same way, knew when I was tired or anxious or craving those terrible honey cakes from the kitchen. It should have felt invasive, having someone that close to your soul. Instead, it felt like home. Scene 18. Birth of our twins. The pains started 3 weeks early, in the middle of the night, while I was sleeping. I'd been dreaming about running through the forest free and wild, and not roughly the size of a house, when a contraction ripped through me hard enough to steal my breath. Kale was awake instantly, the bond flooding with his panic. What's wrong? What hurts? Should I get the healer? The baby's coming, I gasped, gripping his arm as another contraction hit. Now. They're coming now. Chaos erupted. Kale was shouting for healers, for servants, for anyone who could help, while simultaneously refusing to leave my side. I was trying to breathe through the pain and also trying to calm him down through the bond because his panic was making everything worse. Kale, I managed between contractions. I need you to calm down. Calm down? You're in pain. Our child is coming 3 weeks early. How am I supposed to calm down? By remembering that women have been doing this for thousands of years, and we usually survive it. Usually? His voice went up an octave. Usually? Despite the pain, I laughed. The Alpha King who'd faced down assassins and conspirators and an entire coup without flinching was losing his mind because his mate was in labor. The healers arrived and immediately took charge, ushering Kale back despite his protests. You're not helping her by hovering, the head healer said firmly. Either sit down and hold her hand or wait outside. I'm not leaving. Then sit, and try not to pass out. He sat, gripping my hand like it was the only thing keeping him anchored, and through the bond I felt every bit of his terror and awe and desperate love. The labor was long, painful. There were moments when I thought I couldn't do it, when the agony was too much and I wanted to quit, but Kyle was there, whispering encouragement, lending me his strength through the bond, reminding me that I was the wolf who'd survived 6 months alone and fought assassins while pregnant. You can do this, he murmured against my ear during a particularly brutal contraction. You're so strong, love. So brave. Just a little more. Easy for you to say, I panted. You're not the one. I didn't finish because another contraction hit, and suddenly I was pushing and the healers were shouting instructions and Kale was gripping my hand hard enough to break bones. Then a cry. Sharp and loud and absolutely perfect. It's a girl, the healer announced. holding up a tiny, squirming bundle. A girl. We had a daughter, but before I could even process that, another contraction hit. "There's another one," the healer said, shocked. "Twins. You're having twins." "What?" Kale and I said simultaneously. "Push," the healer commanded, and I didn't have time to think about the fact that we'd been expecting one baby and were apparently getting two. The second birth was faster, and moments later another cry filled the room. "A boy," the healer said, smiling. "A son and a daughter. Congratulations, Your Majesties." They placed both babies on my chest, tiny and perfect, and ours and I felt something in my soul shift and settle. This was what we'd fought for. This was why we'd survived everything. For them. Kale was crying openly, his hand gentle on our daughter's head, then our son's, like he couldn't believe they were real. "They're perfect," he breathed. "You're perfect. I can't. I don't." "I know," I whispered, tears streaming down my own face. "I know." Our daughter had his dark hair and my eyes gray-green and already alert, already taking in the world with fierce curiosity. Our son had my lighter hair and Kale's storm-gray eyes, and when he gripped his father's finger with tiny hands, I felt Kale's heart completely shatter and reform around this new reality. He was a father. We were parents. The healers cleaned us up, gave me something for the pain, and finally left us alone with our children. Kale climbed into the bed beside me carefully, like he was afraid I might break, and we just stared at the tiny lives we'd created. "What should we name them?" I asked softly. "I don't know." He pressed a kiss to our daughter's forehead, then our son's. I hadn't thought past just getting them here safely. "Aria," I said, looking at our daughter. For the song in my heart when I first felt her move. "Aria," he repeated, testing it. "I love it. And our son?" I thought about the storm we'd weathered, the darkness we'd survived, the dawn we'd found together. "Luca. It means light. Light after the darkness," Kyle murmured. "Perfect. Aria and Luca. Our twins. Our future." The bond hummed with contentment, and I realized I'd never felt this complete. Never felt this at peace. All the pain, all the suffering, all the terrible choices it had led us here, to this moment, to this family. "I love you," Kale said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you. So much." "We love you too," I whispered back, watching our children sleep against my chest. Through the window, dawn was breaking over the kingdom. Our kingdom now. The one we'd fought for and nearly died for, and would spend the rest of our lives protecting. But right now, in this quiet moment, there was no kingdom. No politics. No threats or dangers or responsibilities. Just us, our family, and a future that finally looked bright. I did not disappear because I was weak. I vanished because fate was not finished with us yet. Because sometimes love requires you to walk through fire before you can find your way home. Sometimes the bond breaks so it can heal stronger. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what truly matters. I disappeared into the forest 6 months ago, broken and alone and carrying a secret I thought would destroy me. I returned as a queen, a mother, a wolf who'd learned that true strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up every single time. And the alpha king who'd torn apart his kingdom searching for me, he learned that some things are worth any cost, any sacrifice, any madness. We learned together that love isn't always easy, or simple, or neat, but it's always worth fighting for. Our story didn't end the night I vanished. It was only just beginning. Thank you for listening to another emotional, magical shifter romance here on Tina Romance Library. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, so you never miss more powerful, heart-gripping romance stories.